Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started now. My presentation is going to be about some basic hurricane hazards information, a little bit about hurricanes and tropical storms and the hazards they bring, and then we'll talk about the 2020 hurricane season, which has been really unbelievable. So let's go ahead and get started. First off, a little bit about this type of storm, a hurricane. It's actually something called a tropical cyclone, and these occur really throughout the tropical oceans across the world. You can see on the map in the upper right some of the basins, the ocean basins where these form, and kind of the general direction they travel, often east to west. And in the Atlantic, there's a tendency for them to sort of recurve back to the north and then the northeast. These are low pressure systems. They circulate counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere. They go clockwise in the southern hemisphere. And they're similar to the low pressure systems we can get in the wintertime along fronts, but these are not associated with fronts at all, and they form over those warm tropical oceans. It's the warm ocean water that gives them their energy. They're all different sizes. You can see in the lower right there an example of a very large tropical cyclone that would fit most of the western U.S., and you can get very, very small ones as well. So what do we need for a tropical cyclone to form? The big thing is we need warm sea surface temperatures, typically 80 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer, and through a certain depth of water. And so we also need little change in wind with height. We need high atmospheric moisture content and an unstable atmosphere. And also you have to be a little bit off the equator. So let's look at some of those parameters now. And what we see on the lower left is on the right-hand side, I should say, is the sea surface temperatures as of yesterday. And so we need at least 80 degrees or 26.5 degrees centigrade. And you can see all those areas in yellow and orange meet that criteria. So we could get a tropical cyclone in any of those areas. If we zoom in on the Gulf of Mexico, you can see the warmest temperatures are over the Northwest Caribbean, not quite as warm over the Gulf, but warm enough to support a tropical cyclone. Actually, right near the Gulf Coast on the northern Gulf, it's actually cooled down quite a bit. Now, in the lower left, we have something called ocean heat content, and that's not only the sea surface temperature, but it also takes into account the depth of the warm water. And again, you see what stands out is that Caribbean Sea. We don't quite have that heat content in the Gulf right now. So if we do get formation, it would probably be in that Northwest Caribbean. Now, we rate the storms based on their winds, something called the Saffir-Simpson Hurricane Wind Scale, and the rating is based on the maximum sustained winds. So what I want you to take away is the number. The number here describes the wind hazard, not the other hazards. So it's not going to tell you about the amount of rainfall. It's not going to tell you about the amount of storm surge exactly. It's really describing the wind hazard. So if you have a high category hurricane coming your way, then understand you could be looking at very significant winds, especially around the center. And those impacts are broken down by number in this table we have shown here and in this link as well. Another way to look at the Saffir-Simpson Hurricane Wind Scale, if the long table of text didn't help, you can see Cat 1 through Cat 5 there on the left-hand side, and then also the damage descriptors that go with each. So a Category 1 is going to give you some damage. Category 2, more extensive, just for reference, Hurricane Ike was a Category 2 when it made landfall, and pretty much a Category 1 minimal as it went through Montgomery County back in 2008. Category 3, like Alicia, that's really going to cause very serious, devastating type damage. A Category 4 would be like Laura that occurred in southwest Louisiana. We'll talk about Laura later on. And then, God forbid, a Category 5, that should read 5 there in the lower right. That's pretty much total destruction near the eye wall as it passes through. So a little bit about the stages of development in the Atlantic. Typically, we get disturbances coming off the coast of Africa. And you can see there in the upper right, they're indicated by dashed lines. So we call those tropical waves. And they emerge off the coast of Africa during hurricane season about every 3 or 4 days. Now, if all those conditions are met, the warm water and the lack of wind shear, the lack of dry air, many of y'all have heard of the Saharan dust coming off Africa and how it can inhibit formation. That really comes about because you have lower instability, you have very dry air that's coming off the deserts of Africa, kind of inhibiting development. But if conditions are right, then some of those tropical waves will develop as they move across the Atlantic. The other thing we're showing here is what's called a subtropical ridge or subtropical high pressure system. And you probably know with high pressure, the circulation around it is going to be clockwise. And so what happens is those disturbances sort of move with that flow generated by that subtropical high, and they move from east to west, and then sometimes they'll kind of pivot all around that high and then start to move more north and recurve out to sea. Some of them, however, will maintain a more east to west motion until they get into the Gulf, and of course those are the ones we have to worry about. So here's a look at what's going on now. These images here were from this morning. And so let's start with the image on the right. You can see Africa there. You can see the dry deserts and more of a green area there indicating vegetation. And we do have a wave coming off Africa right now. And so that's going to continue moving from east to west, and we'll need to watch that to see if it develops. And if you look further out over the Atlantic, there's another one here that the Hurricane Center is watching. And these are from geostationary orbiting satellites. There are several around the Earth. One of them is focused more on Africa in the far eastern Atlantic. And then this is the one we look at more often. This goes east. And you see I've circled that disturbance here approaching the Lesser Antilles. That's an easterly wave that the Hurricane Center is watching right now, giving it a fairly low chance of development, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But there are times when you could see easterly waves just lined up one after another coming off the coast of Africa, and you know you're in for a very busy period. We can look at a weather map from today also. At the Hurricane Center, they do an analysis of the different features on the map. So let's look at Texas first, and we can see that cold front pushing offshore. That's giving us a little bit drier weather today. Pretty comfortable out there today. So that front is offshore now. But if we look here off the coast of Africa, you can see tropical wave is written in. As we saw on the satellite, we saw that cluster of storms coming off Africa. Then here's that other tropical wave around 55 degrees west longitude. And that's just approaching the Lesser Antilles now. So there is actually a weak tropical wave also in the Caribbean that doesn't really have much in the way of clouds or storms with it. So you can see there actually are several tropical waves out there, as we talked about. And maybe one, maybe two, maybe none of those will become tropical cyclones, but they sort of act like seeds that could develop into that tropical cyclone. So when is hurricane season? Basically, what we've got here is a line chart, and the way it's created is you can go back over 100 years and see if there was a tropical storm or hurricane in the Atlantic on that date. And then at the end, you can sum them all up and you get sort of a frequency chart. So what does it tell you? It tells you that we can get hurricanes and tropical storms in June. We can actually get tropical storms in May. We've had that the last several years. But the hurricane season nominally is from June 1st through November 30th. So that's going to capture most of the activity. And you can tell that by the area under this graph. And you can see the peak of the season is right down there around September 10th. So that's it's quite common around that time of year to see several storms out there over the Atlantic. We're kind of in the downglide now in mid-October. And the good news for us on the western Gulf Coast is the late season storms, and we would expect additional. They have more of a tendency to recurve off to the east or northeast, and it's harder for them to make it all the way to the Texas coast. We did have a hurricane some years ago, Hurricane Jerry, that hit Texas on October 15th, and that's the latest hurricane landfall in Texas that we've had. Of course, this is 2020, so never say never, but we're hopeful that the hurricane season has wound down for us here in Texas. And this is just showing a little bit about what we're talking about here. As you go through the hurricane season, let me walk you through this. We've got May tracks, tropical cyclone tracks in the upper left, and then typical formation and formation zones on the other panels as we go through the season. So we've got May, June, July, August, September, October. And notice in October, the western Gulf Coast is not shaded. And the reason for that is, we still very well may get formation. For example, in the Northwest Caribbean, we saw how warm it is there, how warm the ocean water is. But once they form, they have a tendency maybe to move more north and then northeast. So, for example, the Eastern Gulf, Florida, and then Cuba, they're certainly quite likely to see more activity, but it's much less likely as you get to Texas and even Louisiana. Of course, we saw just last week, Delta plowed right into Louisiana. So, there's a case where an October storm did get awfully close to us, and it did impact the Western Gulf. So it doesn't always work out this way. Next, I'd like to show, let's see here. I'd like to show some of the storms that have impacted our area. So there is a website that I'll show you the link for in a moment. You can create maps like this, and you could say, okay, show me all the Category 3 or greater hurricanes that have passed within 75 miles of wherever. In this case, I picked Houston. And I say, okay, show me back to the 1900. So if you look at this inset here, you can see some of these major hurricanes, and a Category 3 or higher is considered a major hurricane. You can see we've got Alicia in 83. Rita looked like it was coming at us, but then took a little bit of a right turn at the end. That's on our list, just barely within that outer radius. And then you have to go back to 1941. There was a major hurricane that passed through Houston. And you can see these on the left-hand column too. 1932, there was a smaller storm that came in down the coast. It's funny, it's not, oh yeah, there it is, right in here. Came into the West End and down into West Columbia. And then you're going back to 1915. in 1909 and 1900. In that 15-year period, we had 3 Category 3 to 4 hurricanes coming into Galveston Island. And of course, we all have heard about the 1900 storm. And so, that came in as a Category 4. The island, Galveston, was lower than it is now. There was no seawall, and that's our largest loss of life that we've had from a natural disaster in our country to date. So that 1900 Galveston hurricane is something I think everybody knows about. And then, wouldn't you know, just 9 years later, another powerful hurricane came in the same area. So what I'm doing, I'm focusing in on all these purple lines here clustered in. Here's a 15-year period where Galveston Island was challenged with 3 direct landfalls from major hurricanes. Of course, by 1909, part of the seawall had been built, and so 1909 storm was a good test of the seawall, and it made a huge difference, and the seawall continues to make that huge difference. The other thing that Galveston did after the 1900 storm, they actually raised the island several feet. So it's become less vulnerable to these types of storms for Galveston proper. Bolivar Peninsula, not the case. That's kind of like Galveston used to be. It's lower and there's no seawall. So, but what it shows, what I'm trying to show is you can get major hurricanes coming in bunches, maybe 3 in a 15-year period, and then you might go, 30 years without. And so for us, probably Alicia back in 1983 was the last more or less direct hit by a high category storm. The other thing I want to point out is, notice many of these storms form in the Gulf, and then there are others that form well out over the Atlantic. You can follow their tracks way out over the ocean. And notice many of these are following this channel through the Caribbean Sea. A lot of people who look at these hurricane tracks over time become more concerned when they see a system tracking through the Caribbean. In some ways, it's a favored channel for us here in Texas. Now, some of those will recurve before reaching us, but notice there are several here that did, in fact, follow that path. We can do something similar. We can say, okay, show me all the tropical cyclones tracking within 50 miles of the woodlands. And so you can see, yeah, we get a bunch, right? I mean, there's dozens of them here. Let me close this out here so I can see a little bit better. And then I'll filter out the tropical storms in a moment. But if you look carefully in here, you'll see on the upper right, here's a list of from the most recent to the older. Imelda, and back in 2019, we remember that very well. Produced a tremendous amount of rain in the eastern part of Montgomery County, especially. Hurricane Ike in 2008. Then you go back, Edward, also in 2008. Grace 03, Allison 2001, another big rain producer. Dean 1995, Jerry, there's that October hurricane I mentioned, 1989. Chantal 1989. So of course we can get them. You can see dozens of them on the map here. And then notice again, tracing back, many of them originate in the Gulf. Gulf developers can come in with very little notice, and then others form well out over the Atlantic. I do want to show Ike. Notice its track was quite a bit north than that more typical lane through the Caribbean, but it then took that jog to the west-southwest, and then brought it more in line with some of the other typical tracks. And just to show some of the and by the way, the website is listed right here, and we'll share that at the end so you can play around with this yourself. But in this case, I said, okay, show me just the hurricanes within 50 miles of the woodlands, and you can see some more listed here. We mentioned Alicia, Deborah in 59, 49, 47. Maybe some of y'all out there remember some of these hurricanes that have passed very near Montgomery County. So every storm is different, but typically contains some combination of these hazards: damaging winds, storm surge flooding, flooding rains, and tornadoes. And you might add high surf as well, and rip currents. That's really been the big story this year for our storms. They've typically been very close calls for us, but they've made direct landfall in other locations, but they've been close enough to give us this very high surf, and even damaging in some cases, along with coastal flooding. Probably for Montgomery County, it's going to be, of course, the flooding rains. That is the biggest impact. You're far enough inland that you don't really need to worry about storm surge. Secondarily, winds can be an issue. We saw that with Ike. Ike held enough strength by the time it passed through Montgomery County. It was still producing hurricane force winds, downing trees, and leading to power losses for a lot of folks. And then tornadoes as well. So, you think about Harvey, that was all about flooding rains and tornadoes for this area. Storm like Ike, that was all about storm surge flooding at the coast and wind damage with power outages for a large number of people. A storm like Tropical Storm Allison, that was all about flooding rains, but very little wind. So every storm is different, is the point I'm trying to make here. Now, of these four hazards, what is the most dangerous? What is the most deadly? And that's going to be the water-related hazards. If you look at which of these lead to fatalities, it's going to be storm surge, number one, and then flooding rains right behind it, number two. It is, a lot of people think about wind when they think about hurricanes, but in fact, it's the water hazards that are the most dangerous. And so that's what this bar chart on the left is telling us. The pie chart on the left, rather. The bar chart on the right, what is it saying? It's saying that 10% of storms have at least one fatality from storm surge. But 50% of storms have at least one rainfall-related fatality. So putting these two things together, what does that say? For hurricanes and tropical storms, storm surge fatalities are only occur in about 1 in 10 storms, but when they do occur, they can occur in large numbers. You can think of it that way. But for flooding rains, and certainly for Montgomery County, these lead to fatalities more frequently. What about indirect non-weather hazards? Now, when we had Laura go into Louisiana after the storm moved through, and it was a Category 4, just a horrific kind of storm, did a tremendous amount of damage. Well, we started to hear about fatalities not directly related to the storm, but related to carbon monoxide poisoning. And we saw this with Ike as well. Sometimes the indirect fatalities are a bigger issue than the storm itself. You also hear about fires from candlelight, heart attacks, both either before, during, or after the storm. You're stressed out both physically and mentally, and more prone to cardiovascular failure or a heart attack. Another thing we've seen post-storm, people who rely on medical equipment, they lose power, and then they get into trouble. So these are things we don't always think about, but we need to, for our preparation, keep these things in mind so we stay safe. Let's talk now about the parts of the hurricane. What I'm showing here is a radar image from Hurricane Ike. And at this time, you can see the storm centered rather, right over Galveston Bay. Now, that center area where we see some light blues here, that's a rain-free zone, and the winds are very light in there. That's called the eye of the hurricane. What about this ring of thunderstorms around the eye? That's called the eye wall. That's where the highest winds are in the hurricane. So what I want you to remember is if the eye wall of the storm passes over your location, you're going to get some of those highest winds in the storm. And at this time, the hurricane was moving sort of up 45, and it was certainly heading into Montgomery County. So Montgomery County did experience the eye wall of Hurricane Ike and did have some of those high winds and wind damage. And then the other thing I want to point out are these bands that spiral out from the center. These are spiral bands. And this is where you can find some very heavy rain and tornadoes. We had that certainly with Harvey. Even with Tropical Storm Beta, we had a very heavy rain band that led to some flooding in some areas. And then here's the appearance of the hurricane on satellite. You see that familiar eye in the center there. Hurricane winds, wind damage. You can see that here. This is from a storm survey that was done. We helped them out after they had Hurricane Michael over in western Florida a couple years ago. And you see this type of damage that can occur with a Category 5. That you might see with a strong tornado. Structures destroyed from the wind, trees snapped over a very large area. So a high category hurricane you can almost think of as a very large tornado, maybe in this case 30 miles wide, pretty much severely damaging or destroying everything in its path. As I said, Hurricane Harvey for us was all about the rainfall. But for the coastal bend and the mid-Texas coast, say down toward Rockport area, it was all about the high winds and the storm surge. This is the radar view from the Corpus Christi radar. It was actually measuring some 140 mile per hour winds coming into the Rockport area at this time. And you can see that eye wall we spoke of right on in to that Rockport area. And so it was a much different type of storm for them as they were getting a direct hit from a Category 4 hurricane. And then here is some of the damage that occurred in the Rockport area as we showed with Michael. Some of these homes pretty much destroyed. It's interesting, if you look across the street, there are some homes that actually stood tall, even with 150 mile per hour wind. So that's quite amazing, but it depends on the quality of construction and maybe a little bit of luck, but these homes did not fare well at all with those Category 4 winds. Talking about the water hazards now, rainfall and storm surge flooding. Harvey is the most, the biggest example for most of us. Imelda was a reminder just a few years after Harvey. But watch the radar loop here. You can see the storm making landfall down the coast. The center tends to weaken, but look at those spiral bands that are pivoting into our area here in the greater Houston area. Just as for those of y'all that were here in 2017, it doesn't seem that long ago. You remember these periods of very heavy rain that kept coming through on these rain bands that were producing 4, 5, 6 inches of rain per hour. And then the rain continued for a number of days, leading to all the catastrophic flooding that we had, including in Montgomery County. Here's a map showing the estimated rainfall. All these areas in purple here, we're looking at greater than 40 inches of rainfall. So that includes several counties, including parts of Montgomery County. But even the pink shading here, that's greater than 25 inches. So what was most remarkable about Harvey is not only the maximum rainfall amounts, but the huge area that they covered. There's really never been a storm like this. In fact, it set the record for the amount of rain from a tropical cyclone in the United States of over 60 inches of rain in Nederland, Texas. But it wasn't just one small area that got clobbered. It was really, a dozen or so counties. So just as you all know, a very, very difficult storm. And then, wouldn't you know, we had a much smaller hurricane, tropical storm come in a few years later, Tropical Storm Imelda. And you'll be able to see Imelda here looping through the area. You can see the swirl with it there. But notice, again, it's going to end up being one of the spiral bands, in this case on the back side, filling in and just pounding Chambers, Liberty, and even eastern Montgomery County with very, very heavy rain. So Imelda was different than Harvey in that the area of heavy rain was much smaller, but the amounts were unbelievable. They were once again over 40 inches, mostly in a 24-hour period over a small area. So anytime you get that kind of rainfall, you're going to get flooding, and we certainly did, the worst of it being in Chambers, Liberty, and eastern Montgomery County. Hurricane Ike was a much different type of hurricane. You can see this thing coming in here, a much bigger hurricane than either Harvey or certainly Tropical Storm Imelda. And notice it wasn't moving particularly slowly. It came in fairly quickly and pulled out quickly. So this was a situation where we wouldn't expect to see flooding rains necessarily, but given the size and strength of the hurricane, we would expect a lot of storm surge. And in fact, that's what we got. Plus, we would expect a huge area of wind damage and power loss, and that's what we saw as well back in 2008. Storm surge flooding. This is, of course, a big, not so much an issue for Montgomery County, but certainly the biggest issue for areas along the coast. These are some scenes from Hurricane Ike along the west end and Galveston Island there. Here's a post-Ike view of Bolivar Peninsula. Prior to Ike, this stretch of land full of homes and vegetation, afterward pretty much stripped clean, except for that one home, which did have damage, but somehow remained standing. So that was quite a accomplishment there. Also notice the bridge here near Rollover Pass was damaged. So what areas are at risk from storm surge flooding? It's all about the elevation. And what we're showing here is basically ground elevation less than 30 feet. And so if you're in that shaded area, you have some risk of storm surge. The good news for Montgomery County is you're high enough that storm surge is really not an issue for you. But to first order, if your ground elevation is lower than the water level due to storm surge and tides, you're going to be flooded unless there's a levee between you and the water. So take a look at Galveston here. Galveston is highest on the seawall side, lowest on the bay side. And you can see some of these blue areas are, less than 5 feet on the bay side, above sea level. And then, places like San Leon, Seabrook, Shore Acres, even parts of Tiki Island and so on, and then down the coast, you can see the lower areas is what I'm trying to say. And so for a surge with Ike on the order of 10 to 13 feet, you'd expect all these areas in green to have seen some flooding. And sure enough, that's pretty much what happened. The other thing I want to show is this is the evacuation zone map that is used for areas pretty much southeast of Houston on up into the southeast part of Harris County. And you can see how it resembles quite closely the storm surge risk area, and that's not by accident. That's why it's based heavily on getting people out of the surge risk zones. Montgomery County not in that evacuation zone, so there may be scenarios where an evacuation is ordered, but given that storm surge is much less of a risk, that should be relatively infrequent. Tornadoes and water spouts, when they do occur, they tend to form in the spiral bands on the right-hand side of the storm. So here's a good Harvey example, a band of thunderstorms along this spiral band and a couple tornado warnings already issued. So that's a quick look at a little bit of hurricane climatology and some of the hurricane hazards. How best to stay informed during the hurricane season? A couple of useful websites, hurricanes.gov, weather.gov/Houston, and then your local emergency management pages as well. So let's take a look now. And remember, early on, we looked at the easterly waves coming off Africa. And what I'm showing you now is a product from the National Hurricane Center on their hurricanes.gov website. And what they do is they look at each of those disturbances and they assign a probability that it will form into a tropical cyclone. So that one we saw approaching the Lesser Antilles, as of 8 o'clock this morning, they were giving it a 20% chance of becoming a tropical depression or tropical storm in the next 2 days. And so this is again called the 2-day tropical weather outlook. I recommend looking at it every day at hurricanes.gov. Here's the 5-day outlook, and likewise it has a low probability of forming as well over a next 5-day period, less than 40%. So they're not really sure if it will develop into a tropical cyclone or not, but that is one they're watching. Notice they're not yet, at least, highlighting the wave coming off of Africa. Now, we're kind of leading into the 2020 hurricane season review. And so let's look back at the May forecast for this season. NOAA was predicting 13 to 19 named storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, and 3 to 6 major hurricanes. So that is an above normal season because the average number of named storms is 12, and the average number of hurricanes is around 6. And but at that time, we had already had one storm, Arthur. And then in August, what is the forecast for this? All right. A little technical glitch. Hang on a sec. Now, in August, that forecast was upped to 19 to 25 named storms and 7 to 11 hurricanes. And so you can see the update there was for really a hyperactive hurricane season. And by then, we had already worked our way halfway through the list. So where are we now as far as the 2020 season? Take a look at all these hurricane and tropical storm tracks that we've had, and look at how many are in the Gulf. The Gulf has been super active, but even overall, we've had 25 named storms, 9 hurricanes, and that's pushed us into the Greek alphabet. Now, you might be thinking, well, we've got 26 letters. How come we're in the Greek alphabet? There's only 21 letters that are used for names on the standard lists. So once we get beyond 21, we're on into the Greek alphabet. And you can see all those tracks there. There was only one other year that was comparable to this, and that was back in 2005. That was the year with Katrina and Rita, among others. And so we can actually look at 2005 and see how it compares. And sure enough, another hyperactive season. Notice if you look at these lists here, there's Maria. Then we go to the lower right. there's Nate, all the way down to Delta, Epsilon, and Zeta. Where are we this year? Well, we're almost to that point. We've gotten through Delta. We just need 2 more named storms to tie this record year as far as the most named storms in a season. And then anything beyond that would set the new record. And, you'd certainly would expect us to break that record this year. In fact, looking back at 2005, look at all these storms that formed in October and later. Wilma, October 15th to 25th. Alpha and Beta also in October. Gamma in mid-November. So we're actually ahead of this season here in that our Delta occurred in the early part of October. The Delta in 05 occurred in late November. And then notice there was even Zeta occurred December 30th through January 6th. So, I don't know if we're going to have storms that far into the season or even beyond, but they can occur. So we have already set records for the number of named storms making landfall. We've had 10 already, and we have a good third of the hurricane season to go. And so you can see the landfall locations here. What we're going to do is take a closer look at the storms in this square here that have affected the Western Gulf. So Hannah, Beta, Delta, and Laura, we're going to take a closer look at. But you keep going on along the coast there. There's Cristobal, Marco, Sally, Bertha, Isaias, and Faye. And they've written in estimated damages with each. So certainly Sally was a big one. Laura, the biggest, perhaps Delta right behind it as far as damages, and Isaias as well. $1 billion storms. We don't have the record for number of hurricanes making landfall yet, but we're just one behind these years, 1985 and 1886. So that's another record we hope not to break, but we certainly could. So let's take a look first at Hurricane Hannah. You can see the radar loop there of Hannah making landfall there in the South Texas coast. For us here in Southeast Texas, we were on the fringe. We did see some high winds around Matagorda Bay. Some gusts up to 50 miles per hour, and we had some elevated tides and beach erosion from the waves that come off these storms. But we did not get the direct impacts because the storm tracked well to our south. You can see a kind of a wind gust analysis there in the lower right, and close to the center in that eye wall portion of the storm, you were getting wind gusts of 80, 90, even greater than 100 miles per hour. And much of those highest winds went into Kennedy County, which is one of the lesser populated areas along the Texas coast. You can see Bob Hall Pier on this map. That pier was actually damaged severely from the surf and the wave action pounding into it. And then we did have some high winds up the coast, even into the Matagorda Bay area. Palacios, Matagorda did have some 50-mile-per-hour winds, and there was some high surf all up and down the Gulf Coast, but not as severe as you would see near the center. Now, you might remember Hannah, this was back in July, initially was forecast to come much closer to us. You can see a sequence of forecast maps here from the upper left. This would be Wednesday, July 22nd. Upper right, Thursday, July 23rd. Lower left, Friday, July 24th. And then lower right, Saturday, July 25th. So the forecast in this case trended down the coast with time, and the storm ended up being a hurricane, even though initially it wasn't forecast to be. So at one point it looked like it could be a direct impact on our area here in Southeast Texas, but eventually we just were on the edges of it. So it could have been a lot worse for us. Hurricane Laura, you can see the long track from Laura. This is one of those hurricanes that we talked about earlier that starts out way over the Atlantic, tracks through the Caribbean, and then on up into our area. In this case, tracked right up in along the center, tracked in along the Texas-Louisiana border, and then the greater Houston area was really on the fringe of the storm. Didn't really see a whole lot here in the greater Houston area from this. The main impacts for us: elevated tides, high surf, beach erosion, again, but much, much worse, of course, as you got to the far eastern parts of Texas on into Louisiana, where they had a Category 4 landfall, tremendous amount of storm surge and wind damage from Hurricane Laura. Very, very close call for us here in Southeast Texas. Here's more of a close-up showing the track of the center, actually just on the Louisiana side of the Texas-Louisiana state line, but close enough to bring hurricane force winds into places like Orange, Texas, over to Beaumont, and then, you know, anywhere along that eye-wall track is where you're going to get just, you know, devastating wind damage. So up into Lake Charles, they had those very high winds, and then storm surge up to 16 feet above ground in some of the smaller towns just to the right of the center. So Grand Chenier and Creole and places like that really got hit extremely hard. For people in Houston, a lot of folks were saying, what happened? You know, the winds weren't that strong, didn't really get much rain here. But Laura was a fairly average-sized storm. It wasn't especially large, and so the winds were more concentrated near the center track. And so while we were maybe getting 30-mile-per-hour winds, you know, less than 100 miles away, they were getting those 140-mile-per-hour winds. So it was really that close to us. Let's look at the track of Laura over time, and you can see how it kept trending to the east and then eventually settled on a track near the Texas-Louisiana border. But you can see how close it came. In fact, about 2 days out, there was a little bit of a jog to the west in the forecast track that brought it right into our area. And so on August 26th, there was a lot of people saying, hey, is that thing going to turn? You know, look how menacing it looks there out over the Gulf. And sure enough, it did. You can see the satellite view there of it tracking inland on the Louisiana side of the Texas-Louisiana border. The image on the left-hand side is the radar image, and we've talked about that before. You can see it on the coastline here. That ring around the eye is the eye wall. That's where the most severe winds were occurring. And that little black dot you see there, if you look carefully, that's actually the Lake Charles. Sorry about that. That's the Lake Charles radar. And so the eye wall at this time was just getting into that area, and the radar was getting hit by those 140-mile-per-hour winds. Here's another look at the a loop of the radar, and you'll see the storm coming in, moving fairly quickly through. You see that eye wall holding together there. So a storm like Laura, moving fairly quickly, high category storm, you know, what hazards would you expect? You would expect severe winds, maybe not so much rain because it's moving quickly, and very high storm surge near and to the right of the landfall. And so that, of course, is what we got, along with some elevated tides and high surf over a much larger area, including along our beaches. This is a look at the radar data from Lake Charles, Weather Service Lake Charles radar, at 12:53 a.m. On the morning, early morning hours. The storm has made landfall here, and there's that little black dot there is the location of the radar that I'm pointing to with my cursor. Now, the Weather Service radar, it measures what we call reflectivity or rainfall, and you can see that the eye near Cameron at this time, and then the ring around the eye being the eye wall where you find the highest winds. But it can also measure how fast the raindrops are moving, either toward or away from the radar. And what I'm showing you here is the radar was measuring 155 miles per hour raindrops blowing away from the radar. So that gives you an idea of a radar measurement of the winds in that zone along the western part of the eye wall. Very, very, very strong winds. And so this was actually the last image that the radar was able to take. And here's what it looked like after. You can see on a nice calm weather day, the radar and the radome standing there on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, completely destroyed. That dome is gone, destroyed by the 140 to 150 mile per hour winds, and it's kind of exposed some of the interior structure there of the radar. They are working to fix that as we speak, probably a few months away before they can get that radar back online. Here's the view from up where the radar normally is, and of course it's perfectly exposed now because that radome is destroyed. And you can see some damage to structures around there, some tarps on structures. Some actually did okay. Notice all the power trucks here lined up, just a long road to recovery after Laura. And we'll see in a little bit that Delta ended up affecting a lot of the same areas. But first, let's talk about Beta. What we're looking at here in blue is the area of tropical storm force winds, and in yellow, kind of the swath of 50 mile per hour winds. So Beta actually tracked into the Texas coast down near Matagorda Bay, but was weakening as it approached landfall. So by the time it got to land, it was only a weak tropical storm, about 40 mile per hour winds. But it was slow moving, and you see what it did is it stalled out here and then just kind of drifted over southeast Texas. So what I'm going to have y'all do now is type in, I'm going to ask a question and see if you can type this in. What type of hazards would you be most concerned about with Beta? Beta being a weak tropical storm, but very slow moving. And so if you can, type into the question dialog what hazard would be you expect to see, or hazards. And remember, the possibilities are wind damage, tornadoes, flooding rains, or storm surge, or both, or all of those. What do y'all think? And yep, I see the answers coming in. And y'all have pretty much got it right. It's going to be, the biggest concern is going to be flooding rains, because you have a slow-moving tropical system, basically. And I'll show you the rainfall with this. You don't worry too much about winds because the wind part of the storm is relatively weak, only 30 to 40 miles per hour. And sure enough, we didn't really have much in the way of wind damage. A few of you mentioned storm surge. We did see some storm surge with this, because not only we had a weak system, but we actually had some pretty strong northeast winds north of the track. There was actually a high pressure system to the north, so that's a good answer as well. But for a slow moving tropical storm, right away think about flooding rains. And so here's a radar loop of beta, and you'll be able to see the swirl coming on in and kind of falling apart. But look up in our area, there's a spiral band again of heavy rain pounding one location for the most part. And I actually happened to be underneath that band of rain. It was about 10 miles wide, but it wasn't budging. And so we were getting a tremendous amount of rain at high rain rates, kind of like a mini Harvey, if you will. I mean, they're not in the same class by any means, but we were, again, it's that slow-moving tropical system. Look out for those bands of heavy, heavy rain. And so here's a look at the rainfall analysis. You can see a fairly large area of 4 to 7 inches in yellows and browns here. And then up in Montgomery County, it was more in the 2 to 4 inch range. But in this band right in here, this is where we got pounded, with 15 inches of rain all falling in one evening. And so, we know right away, okay, we're going to get flooding in this zone. So places like Bel Air, Pearland, Friendswood, and then down here into League City, we were getting a lot of flooding from this. And it so happens that certain creeks and bayous are in this zone of very heavy rain as well, and they reacted also. So sure enough, even though beta was weak, it was enough to produce flooding rain for parts of our area. And there was another small bullseye of heavy rain near the center, and you can have that occur as well. All right, so let's talk about Delta as we're kind of winding down here with our review. Now, you can see the long track of Delta up through the Caribbean, across the Yucatan, and then turning up into, again, southwest Louisiana. What do the colors represent on these maps I've been showing? The red is the swath of hurricane force winds, the yellow 58 mile per hour sustained winds, and the blue tropical storm force. So one difference between Delta and Laura, even though they made landfall very close to one another, Delta was a lower category storm. It was a category 2 at landfall, but it was bigger. It actually extended into our area as far as the wind fields go. So a higher category hurricane making landfall in this area, moving fairly steadily along. What do you think would be the more significant hazards for a storm like Delta? A large category 2 moving pretty steadily, but remember the size is important too. So go ahead and type in your answer here. What do you think? And of course, if you follow the news, you may know the answer already. But what types of hazards would you be concerned about from a storm like Delta? Moving steadily, but it's high category and large. All right, I see some answers being typed in. Go ahead and type in your answer if you would, if you like. All right, very good. Category 2. Thinking back, you'd expect to see very significant wind damage, not quite as high as with Laura, which was a category 4. But it's a large hurricane. It's going to push a lot of water up onto land. So certainly damaging winds, certainly storm surge. It's not as big as an Ike, though, but nonetheless, you would worry about those hazards. Could be tornadoes as well, and any banding on the right-hand side. And even though it's moving steadily, it's not really racing through the state, and it's fairly large. So there's a little bit of concern about flooding rains too, although probably the biggest threat would be storm surge and high winds. And this is more of a close-up view of the wind area Again, the hurricane force winds primarily here in red. And then back in the greater Houston area, we were getting some high winds as well on the western fringe of Delta. So we actually had wind gusts in Galveston over 50 miles per hour. But again, the most severe damage, unbelievably, in that same area that was hit by Laura. And looking at the rainfall was pretty significant as well. They had some very high rain rates down here south of Alexandria and northeast of Lake Charles. So they actually had quite a bit of rainfall flooding as well. So really, Delta had it all. It had the surge, the wind, and the flooding rains. So just to sum up my portion, and then Megan will take over after me. The season has been one of the most active on record, and by some measures it may set a new record for the most number of named storms. It likely will. Several storms impacted the Gulf Coast. We've had actually 7 landfalls of named storms on the Gulf Coast, and many of these just missed southeast Texas as far as direct impacts. But we did see heavy surf, elevated tides, and some wind from each of these storms. But we had direct, very severe impacts very close to us. Every storm is different and brings a different set of hazards. I did want to mention our website and our social media as good ways to stay informed, and also to make sure you all plug into your emergency management information too through their social media websites and Twitter. So in this case, that would be for most of you all Montgomery County. So that's all I have. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand it off to Megan, and she's going to present her screen. So Megan, you should see there. I see your screen.
Can you see my screen?
I can, so go right ahead.
All right, well, thank you, Dan. That was really interesting information. Thank you guys for being here with us this afternoon. So I just want to spend a few minutes and discuss disaster preparedness, kind of give you some ideas for those ways we can prepare for those incidents Dan talked about. And this is stuff we've all seen before. It's just good to have a refresher. And even though we are on the downhill side of hurricane season, we next kind of roll into a winter storm phase, then into spring flooding, then in through the summer droughts and wildfires, and then back into hurricane season. So it is never ending in Texas.
Hey, Megan, I think you're muted.
Oh, there you go.
You're good. You were fine at the start. Just for a second there, you're muted.
So sorry about that. Okay, so we want to discuss for how our citizens can do their part. It's very important to make sure that we can take care of ourselves during all hazards. And then we want you to have an all hazards approach, which means you're ready for anything. So you want to pre-plan before your disaster comes, and have a plan for wherever you may be. So make sure this is workable, whether you're at home, you're at work, you're at school. Acquire your items needed for you and your family ahead of time, and revise your plan for anything, any circumstances that may change in your life. Make sure your plan is always workable, and then teach others in your household to be ready, and make sure that is fluctuating, as far as children with their age. If you have other family members living with you, know how to teach that plan. So the 3 main steps to preparedness that we always talk about is make a plan, build a kit, and stay informed. We're going to dive into these steps and break them down on how you can make your plan. So know before the storm happens how you and your family will react. Build your kit and have your supplies assembled and gathered before the disaster strikes, and then stay up to date on the latest information. So when making a plan, there's several planning considerations that you'll take. What plan do you and your family have in place? So will you shelter in place? Will you leave your home? Where will you go? Does everyone in your family know the plan? Have you practiced your plan? Have you taught your children or any relatives who may be staying with you? And then have a plan for your evacuation and transportation. So update your plan and allow yourself time and make considerations for social distancing during COVID. And then also check on your neighbors. So do you have elderly neighbors or any vulnerable family members who may need your help? And just ensure that there's some time to help them out. And then other planning considerations. So Dan mentioned this briefly. Montgomery County is not an evacuation county due to our distance from the coast, so we don't get that threat of storm surge, which is one of the many reasons that those coastal counties will often evacuate. We're a pass-through county. So this means we want our residents to shelter in place, allow time for those down at the coast or who have been given that mandatory evacuation order, allow them time to get out, stay off the roads. And if you hear in Houston that they have issued a mandatory evacuation, that will not apply to Montgomery County. If for some reason there is a mandatory evacuation in your area, you'll be notified, and there's different ways. We'll do that through press releases, through our local media sources. You can get the rave alerts on your phone that are geofenced to that area that's in danger, and then there are even times where you may have first responders knocking on your door. But for the most part, we ask you to not evacuate. So if you do have to evacuate or you feel unsafe, if you're in one of those areas that is prone to flooding and it's not safe to stay home, take some considerations given the COVID environment we're living in right now. So with the current climate, you may not want to go to a congregate shelter. Maybe think about staying with your family member or getting a hotel, heading out of town. But if it's safe to do so and it's possible, you want to shelter in place at home. And if you do have to visit a shelter, whether in our county or in another county, be prepared for health screenings and temperature checks, and make sure you know the local public health ordinances in the area that you're going to. So a few other planning considerations that we don't want you to forget. Secure your outside items. Make sure you bring in patio furniture and outdoor toys, stash it away in the garage, board windows if necessary, and bring your pets indoors always during a storm. And that kind of goes with, how Dan talked about your your rain event versus your wind event. So maybe it's not always necessary to board your windows. Maybe this is going to be a rain event. And then consider your past storm experience. So know your area and what you've faced in the past. Unfortunately, we have seen several incidences lately in Montgomery County, so we kind of have learned our areas if you've been here for a couple of years. Is flooding an issue in your area? Do you have a lot of trees and you get wind damage? And use those past events you've been through as a learning tool. And then also have alternative ideas. So invest in a CB radio in case there's loss of cell signal for communication for your family or for evacuation notices. For example, my sister was in an area that was affected by Delta. I was trying to check on her last weekend. We couldn't text each other. We couldn't really call. Her phone kept dropping signal. So a cell tower in their area was affected. And then have in mind alternative driving routes in case yours is restricted, and designate a meeting spot for your family. So sometimes these events, they come on really quickly. You may not be able to get home. Have a pre-designated spot to meet your family if you know that perhaps your subdivision floods and you may not be able to get in or out. So it's very important to make sure that you're covered, and this is something that you want to jump on and check. So check on your homeowner's insurance. You need to know what damages does your insurance cover, what is your deductible so that you are prepared in case you do have to file a homeowner's claim, say due to a down tree or anything. And then do you have the supplies that you need to protect your home, such as boards or a place to store your patio furniture. And then also check, do you have flood insurance? So homeowners insurance does not cover flood damage. Homeowners insurance covers anything coming from the sky down. It does not cover the water coming from the ground up. So if you're flooding, your homeowners insurance will not help. And then some areas, they mandate you to carry flood insurance, depending on where you live. And even if you do not live in a flood zone, it's still a good idea to make sure you have that flood insurance. As we've learned over the last few years, anywhere in this area can and will flood. So this is an example of a family plan. It's good to hang this on a common place such as your refrigerator. This can be tailored anything to your family's needs, but it's just a quick grab and go information. That way everyone can see, have the information and have access to it. And this is a document that we have available on our website at mctxoem.org. So when building your kit, this is another thing that you want to make sure you tailor it to your needs. Make it specific to your family, to what you need. And this is just a very basic start, but it's recommended that you have 1 gallon of water per person per day. You want to have non-perishable food for at least 3 days. You want to have a first aid kit that includes your prescription medication if you need that. Make sure you have some emergency tools, flashlights, batteries, a battery-operated radio, and a multi-use utility tool. Extra cash and keys or checks. Cash is good to have on hand in those situations in case the power is down and you can't use your credit card at a gas pump or an ATM. And then also copies of some important documents. So with COVID, we want to make some planning considerations for building your kit. So get your supplies early. Don't wait till there's a storm in the Gulf, because we see what happens to the grocery store shelves, when we know that there's a storm coming our way. And we've also seen a mix of shortages because of COVID. So go ahead and get on top of that. And even, like I said, even though hurricane season is winding down, it's always good to have your kit ready to go year round. If you are on a prescription medication, talk to your pharmacist or doctor and see if they'll allow you to do an early refill. And then you'll also want to keep masks and other PPE items in your kit. FEMA is recommending 2 cloth face coverings per person for your kit, and also make sure you have hand sanitizer, disinfectant, just other items to help protect yourself. So a few ways to build your kit without having to go into the store. You can always do curbside pickup for your groceries. Most of our grocery stores are doing the curbside now, so those food and canned good items and jugs of water you need, just order them if you're able to. You can also order online. You can order fully built kits and first aid kits and the tools you might want to put in your kit. And then also check around your house for these items. It's likely that you have flashlights and batteries and candles all in random drawers or cabinets. Grab those and get them together, put them in your kit, and have them ready to go. This is an emergency supply kit checklist. So this goes into detail of everything that you could possibly use for your kit. Make sure you make your kit to meet your family needs. So, don't forget medications, baby supplies, pet supplies, and then your kit can be dual purpose. So we don't typically evacuate in Montgomery County. Usually we'll hunker down. So make sure that kit is somewhere that you can easily access it, or put it in something like a tote. You can throw it in your trunk, take it with you, and all of these supplies are going to be very helpful to you on the road. And this document, again, it's available on our website. So our last big step to preparedness is to stay informed. You want to always make sure you're following reliable and trustworthy sources for information. We don't want to fall into that media buzz-induced panic. And follow proper news channels and media outlets related to your area. So in Montgomery County, we see our Houston news channels. Sometimes those channels aren't exactly relevant to us, especially if they're telling, our coastal residents to evacuate. It doesn't apply to us. So follow locally your fire departments, our office, law enforcement offices, government entities, and then our always favorite source is the National Weather Service. Everything we put out, we get directly from Dan and those guys because they have the best info. And over there on the left, that's our information. So we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have an app, which we'll discuss. We are online, and you can get Alert MCTX emergency alert notifications. So the Ready MCTX app, it is free in the App Store. On the left, that's the little screenshot of what the home page looks like. So within this app, it does a lot of things. You can create and update your family plan. There's documents on there, such as an emergency supply checklist. There's need-to-know information booklets on various important topics. And then you can also see the latest press releases from our office, and it has quick location access for some vital services in the county. And lastly, if you have not yet done so, sign up for Alert MCTX. So these are going to be those alerts that are geofenced to our location for your phone. Don't turn these off if you get one. It is important and specific to your location. You can sign up for this at mc911.org, and this is in partnership with Smart 911. So what this is, if you call 911 within Montgomery County and you've created a profile, your information will pop up on dispatch's screen, and it kind of pre-identifies your information, any health issues you may have, and so it will help with if a first responder has to respond to your location. But through this, you can opt in to receive emergency notifications through the Rave Alert system. So that is all I have. Thank you guys so much for joining us. If you have any questions, Dan, you want to take it back over?
Sure. Yeah, what I'll do is